Welcome back, everyone. We're going to begin our panel discussion. We have three great panelists here for you tonight. We have Kristiansen, who's the current CEO of Neal, Nick Gribbon, who's Executive Search Consultant at Blackwood, and Nick Bishop, Managing Director of Morgan Stanley. So how tonight, yeah. So how it's going to work, I'm going to pick their brains on modern-day recruitment and then pass the questions and answers over to you guys. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. So I'm going to start with the first question.
First of all, good luck with picking our brains.
The first question I have is for Nick Bishop. You're a Managing Director at Morgan Stanley. Can you tell us about how you got there?
Sure. Hopefully everyone hear me. So the answer I'm going to give you is the sort of unvarnished, non-HR team answer to the question. So as we're a small group, I'm sure we can all keep this amongst ourselves. I would say there's probably 5 things. So I'm going to try and keep this concise, but I do think there are probably 5 things that get you promoted to MD. The first 2 are sort of the ticket for entry, if I put it that way. One is hard work. And the sad reality is investment banking does require a lot of hard work. And believe me, it doesn't get much easier when you get to MD. All the way through, it does require hard work. I think there's a bit of an impression that at some point when you become very, very senior, you just go out for lunch and drink lots of red wine. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case if it was indeed ever true. So one is hard work. The other is technical ability. And so I guess when we're kind of screening for analysts that's kind of the entry level position with investment banking, we are very focused on people's technical abilities. And the reality is, all the way through investment banking, you need to have a core toolkit of technical skills. Now, those 2 together will hopefully get you into the seat, and they will probably see you all the way through until you reach vice president, which is basically between years 6 and 9 in investment banking. There are then, I think, some further things that you need to kind of make that next level up. One is around internal networking. Not to be underestimated. The reality is of getting promoted to MD, it is a joint decision by a number of people. So it is not, unfortunately, just your own line manager or your own direct reporting line who will get you promoted. It's often a group of people who sit in a room at a certain time in the year, normally there's around 10 of them, and they all need to know you, and they all need to have a positive impression of you. And part of what you need to do as you work through your career is figure out who are the opinion formers in the firm, because it is a collegiate decision. That step up to MD is certainly not something that's taken lightly. The next one is around external networking, and that's, I guess, pretty obvious. But you need to build up, over time, some client relationships, because that is, in the end of the day, how you generate activity, how you generate transactions. And that is actually quite a long-term process. I mean, I've known clients for over a decade, and those clients are the types of people that I now work with, which is around kind of knowing what you are good at. And that sort of, it sounds very obvious when you say it like that, but it actually takes a real time to figure that out. And you should be reliant on people telling you. So your managers and your mentors should be guiding you as you move through your career. But what I find very interesting about investment banking is it is not one size fits all. There is no typical managing director. And I'll give you just an example of my own career where I worked for 2 people, and you couldn't find 2 more different people from a personality perspective. One was incredibly charismatic, very outgoing. All he ever did was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And he was an incredibly successful guy because people just liked being around him, liked spending time with him. And he was very successful in his career. And then another individual who I worked with was almost the exact opposite. Actually quite an introvert, but incredibly technically skilled, incredibly diligent. I've never known someone so prepared for every client meeting and interaction. He is someone who would write out 2 sides of A5 paper, double underline the important words, and then put them in highlighted just to make sure he'd got the script right. Both those individuals were incredibly successful. Both made MD in their early 30s. And it's one of those things where you have to figure out what you are good at. And I think there was a very interesting study, I forget the name of the author now, who identified 10 core skills and what they did, a very big study of senior managers, and they discovered actually, generally speaking, people who reach the CEO level are very good at 2 or 3 things, and they are good enough at the other 6 or 7. And that's very true for investment banking. When I look at the people who are successful, they do tend to be very good at 2 to 3 things, and they are just good enough at the rest. So that's, I think, the 5 core things you need to be successful and get promoted to MD. And look, I mean, the hard reality is it is getting harder. So if I think about pre-crisis at my previous firm, we would typically promote 10 people every year to managing director. During the crisis, that slipped down to 2, of which I was, I guess, 50% of that. And it slipped back up to 5. But the hurdle to get to MD has definitely become harder. So what I would say to people coming into investment banking, I know there's a lot of people in this room who may be considering it, is think about it as a career path that may not end in you being an MD. It may end in you getting a very good experience, very good training. And if I think about all the people who I've worked over the years, a lot of them work in corporates in very senior positions. The MD thing is right if investment banking is right for you. It's absolutely not right for everybody. And so I think when you go in, just go in eyes open.
Thank you. Going back to that last point you were mentioning, are you going to stay, do you think, at Morgan Stanley?
What a great question. Yeah. There's a headhunter in the room. I'm sitting next to a headhunter and a client, so that's a phenomenally good question. So, and I've only been here 7 months, so it would be, I guess, premature to be saying I was already thinking of leaving. I would answer it maybe a different way. I'm nearly 40, not quite, nearly 40. I think it's a little bit like dog years doing investment banking. It takes its toll. I would say I would be very surprised if I was doing this at 60. I would be somewhat surprised if I was still doing this at 55, and then let's see where we go from here. But it's something that just all joking aside, you have to enjoy what you do. And I think a lot of people kind of approach investment banking because they've heard you get paid lots of money and it's glamorous. And believe me, the glamour is kind of, well, the glamour bit's overrated. Kind of getting 2 red eyes back to back, New York and back in a day is nothing to get very excited about. But you have to enjoy it. You have to wake up every morning saying, I'm enjoying this job, because if you're working 14 to 18 hours a day, if you do not enjoy it, you're going to have a miserable life. So I think it's one of those jobs that's also quite hard to figure out, I think, from the outside. So a lawyer, a doctor, you know what a lawyer and doctor does. It's actually quite hard to figure out what an investment banker does. So I think find out as much as you can about it before you embark on the journey. But look, I enjoy it immensely, and I plan to be doing it for many years yet.
My next question is for you, Nick Gribbon. In your experience, what do you think makes the difference between a good candidate and a fantastic candidate? We had a lot of talk today about unique selling points, go with what you love. What would you say to them?
And obviously, my life is spent searching for and looking for the great candidates and the fantastic candidates. I suppose the important point to make first and foremost on that is, of course, greatness is in some respects relative as well, and ultimately it will depend upon what the nature of the role is that you're looking for and what the nature of the company is that you're looking to work with in the future. But I suppose it's a very important point to make, because ultimately, if you are going to position yourself as great, you have to be able to differentiate yourself from the crowd, and you have to be able to say, this is why I'm appropriate for your business, and this is why my skill set is different from all of the other people who are obviously looking to be involved in the process as well. I think that clearly experience, and by experience I mean practical experience in the workplace, academic experience, life experience is all very important to formulating the ingredients that go on to make people great, or great as candidates. But of course, there is also the softer side, and Nick just touched on this as well, and that's the point relating to how you as an individual can differentiate yourself from the crowd and what attributes you can bring to the table. When it comes to a process in terms of what you're looking to get involved in, evidently you will certainly stand out from the crowd through preparation, and preparing before any process is absolutely fundamental. I think there are so many tools that we have at our fingertips nowadays, so many resources that we can tap into. There's no excuse for underperformance. So I think first and foremost, you will not have that opportunity to stand out as a fantastic candidate unless you have prepared effectively for any process that you're going into. But then above and beyond that, there are going to be certain character traits that will definitely stand people out. And this comes back to the point about knowing what it is that you want to do and knowing what kind of industry you want to work in, where you're going to enjoy yourself and where you're going to enjoy the work, because those character traits will be applicable in some industries and they won't necessarily be applicable in other industries. So if you're thinking about pursuing a career in investment banking where relationship building is obviously going to be absolutely fundamental, then clearly you have to make sure that you stand out from the crowd in terms of your personality when it comes to relationship building. But equally, if you want to go down the path of marketing or engineering, there are going to be certain attributes that you'll certainly need to do to stand out from the crowd in that respect. So I think that knowing what you want is absolutely fundamental to be able to shape your story, the unique selling point obviously being about ensuring that you stand out from your competition, making sure that you are prepared for what it is that you're going to be doing in terms of the process. And then, of course, being authentic. And authenticity is one of the things that I always look for whenever I'm interviewing people. And it doesn't matter what level you are, it doesn't matter where you are in your career. Being genuine, being authentic, and absolutely believing in your heart what it is that you want to do is fundamentally why you're in the room and why you're interviewing for a position will certainly serve to stand you out from the crowd.
Thank you. When candidates are applying for jobs, obviously on your CV and cover letter, that's a way to portray who you are and your authenticity. But with the rise in technology, is it really important to use other forms, or is it still very traditional at this point?
It's not very traditional anymore, and I think if you think about the recruitment industry, the search industry, it's evolved massively, and since inception, it's a relatively embryonic industry in comparison to other industries. The first search firm was established no more than 60 years ago, I believe, and over that period of time, the industry has evolved enormously, and today, clearly technology is playing a massive role in the process of basically presenting yourself to the market. I think that, CVs are probably going to become obsolete in the not too far distant future. I do receive approaches from people who say, they approach me, I say to them, well, please do send me your CV, and of course we're happy to consider it. And they say, I don't have a CV, go to my LinkedIn page. So, that is definitely shifting quite dramatically. But of course there are other social platforms that people can use to show how authentically interested they are in something. So, utilization of Twitter to engage with your prospective employer and to be involved in the debate and actually start to get your name out there. So I think technology is a fundamental part of the process. It's not going away. We're embracing it, and as a search firm, we utilize it. But at the end of the day, it's about the people. And so you're never going to stand out just through being a name on a list or just through having a nice profile on LinkedIn. It's about having that opportunity to show who you are individually.
Thank you. Anders, our question for you is, how is recruitment different in a fashion retail company versus industries such as investment banking?
To be honest, I don't think there's such a big difference, whether you're recruiting for a fashion industry or investment banking or whatever it is. And within our company, we have got many different functions. So we got finance functions, we got all the creative guys that are designing and producing our clothes, and we got marketing. So I guess within that is very different. So if we had a guy that was applying for a job within the finance team and he showed up with a mohawk and tattoos and piercings, it would probably be difficult to get that job because he would be interacting with a guy like Nick. So that doesn't work. But if you're applying for a job within the creatives, designer within clothes, I mean, you can have as many tattoos and as many piercings as you want because it kind of goes with the territory. So it's very different depending on which role you're going for. And I think, it's all about, preparation, knowing up front, what is expected in that role. You need to be prepared, whatever job you're going for. And it's different from job to job.
The next one is kind of for everyone. Do you value work experience or academic achievement, or is it a balance of the both?
I think, it's amazing to me, the guys who now come for the analyst interviews, how much experience they already have. I mean, if I think about when I was at university, I certainly wasn't thinking about investment banking. I was thinking more about what was I going to do with my summer holidays. It now seems everyone's like spending their summer holidays interning at Google, then at Morgan Stanley, and then if there's time to kind of do something interesting in Thailand at the end of their summer, then maybe they will. But so I think it's clearly become a lot more competitive from that respect. One of the things I would say is, no disrespect to my HR colleagues, but the way the screening process works is it's very, very focused on academics. And I think, look, naturally, if you're the person running the HR function and you're running the first screen of all the candidates, if you've been to a tier 1 university and you've got a good degree and you've got some relevant experience, that's sort of 3 ticks, then you're into the analyst interview process. If you haven't, you quite often have to find some other way in, because the reality is that first screen, I mean, it's incredible how many applications we get, and 90+% of them will be rejected and won't even make it past the first screen. So what I would say is, when I interview someone, it's already been through that process. So actually, I've already got confidence that the person is academically qualified. What I look for when I interview someone is a rounded personality, someone that I would want opposite me or with me, working either with a project or with a client. And that's the bit that HR, look, it's the nature of the process, difficult to screen. I see that as my job, is to figure out, actually, is this someone, when we bring them into our industry, is someone that's going to have a long-term future? Because I think there are a lot of people who are very good at crunching Excel models, and that's great for the first 3 years, but at some point you actually have to interact with a real live human being. It's called a client. And if you're not able to do that, then the industry is not for you.
I completely agree with that point, and particularly when we're interviewing people, albeit the kind of individuals that we're going to be focusing on will be already at a kind of 10, 15, 20 years stage down the line. We're not just looking, obviously, for some form of on-paper screening in terms of academics or indeed of experience sometimes. A lot of our interviewing process is focused on competencies, and the competencies that you gain and the skills that you learn within the workplace are things that cannot be learned elsewhere. So team building, for example, or interacting with potential clients, relationship building, many of these things you're only going to get through practical work experience, which I suppose is part of the reason why so many people are going down the path of a combined study and getting practical experience as well. I think that it's interesting when you look at kind of statistically in a FTSE 100 breakdown, or the FTSE 250 or the Fortune 500, the number of CEOs who have not actually gone through any form of higher education. And it's a remarkably high number. But of course, the work market that we're in at the moment is increasingly more competitive. So evidently, having that balance where you can be differentiated through the screening process is critical. It's interesting you mentioned Google, actually, because Google are renowned for equally being incredibly tough in terms of getting through that initial screening. And if you haven't got the academic grounding, you're just not going to be able to get that first step on the ladder.
What would impress you personally?
So what we're looking at in our business is the wow factor. So, what is it? If you don't have the academic background, or if you don't have a strong academic background, what is that wows us? Have you climbed Mount Everest? Have you been the president of the local rugby club? Have you put something together that you're really proud of and you can demonstrate to others what you have done? Something that makes you stand out. And there are too few of those. And that's what we're looking for, exceptional people that are making a difference. Because if they can make a difference in their private life and what they're doing, of course they can in the business. So, yeah, academic background, it's important, but we're looking for the wow factor.
Okay. Going back to what you were saying about private life, I think a lot of us are very concerned that with our social media, like our Instagram and even Facebook, that recruiters are going to look into it and see us at the pub on a Friday night. Is that really the case? Do you go that far into looking into a candidate's online virtual life?
Are you that sad? Do you do that?
It's all part of our due diligence, of course, to be thorough in the process. I think it's important. It's an important point, and we do check everything. I mean, part of our job is to ensure that people do not essentially falsify what it is that they're telling us, and you have to do some digging. And it comes back to my point about preparation. If something slips through the net that I could have accessed on behalf of a client that is there on the internet, then obviously my client's not going to be particularly happy with me. So I think that it is worthwhile bearing in mind the need for discretion, because people will check. I think that it will probably change dependent upon seniority in terms of how much detail people do go into and also what kind of job you're applying for as well. But most definitely a sprinkling of discretion, I think, is probably quite important in terms of the photographs that you're loading up. Of course, everyone's probably going to go straight on my Facebook page after this and see all of the photos that I've got loaded up, but of which there are not any. But I think the other point is about being, it comes back to authenticity, but that being truthful as well, because there are far too many instances where we've seen high-profile chief executives, believe it or not, who have falsified information about themselves, and it was not Anders. But no, there was examples within Yahoo of the chief executive who professed to have a degree in technology which he didn't actually have. So, clearly the internet is enabling us to know more about everyone, and we all have a curiosity to know who it is that we're meeting and who it is that we're talking, and so I think be careful.
Exactly, but what we also do, we check, the candidates, do they follow us on the social media? So if you go to an interview and you sit there and you tell us how much you love our business, and we've been checking you're actually not following us on social media, you probably don't love us that much. Yeah. It needs to come across in those meetings. You got 1 hour. You need to be totally on it. You need to be prepared. You need to be passionate about it. And if you then haven't been following us on social medias, that doesn't work. You would never be able to sell that.
Looking at the flip side, a lot of people, I think, change their names so that you can't find them on the internet. Would you find it off-putting if you Googled, say, me, and I was nowhere to be found?
That's a bit dodgy.
I think I would find that pretty off-putting. I think I would. And the other thing I was going to add is be very open about any issues you think you might have. Because if you're not, and then we find out about them, it's terminal. Because we don't trust you. And if we can't trust you, then you're not coming into the business. And I have been involved in instances where people have been less than honest about either their financial record, which obviously if you're joining a bank is very important, or some minor misdemeanor, which there may be a perfectly valid explanation for, but if you haven't told us and it comes up in the screening, and it will, because we're very thorough about checking all this stuff, then unfortunately it's a no, because unfortunately if you weren't open with us, we can't trust you.
Thank you. The final question from me is for all of you, do you have any tips on what not to do in interviews? Do you have any examples of bad interview experiences that we may not be aware of?
I got plenty of those. And what surprises me, even with senior candidates, you still have bad experiences, and what I'm going to share is pretty rudimentary, and it's come back to the preparation point. Please, if you've got 1 hour interview, be prepared for it, do your due diligence, as it's the only job in the world, that's how prepared you're going to be. Someone said up there, don't spray, be targeted, and that's what you have to be. Pick a few jobs and then be 100% prepared. I was interviewing not too long ago, and it might even have been a client from this young man here. But it's a senior position. It's a job that what the individual is responsible for, buying of £1 billion, so a massive job. And I asked the individual, so why would you like to join Neal? I said, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. And, if that's 5 minutes into the conversation, you kind of lost it there. So, and maybe I should give her a chance more or two, but I'm like, if you don't love the company that I love very much, sorry, go work somewhere else. So, it's the preparation bit. When we ask people, what do you think of our website? Oh, I haven't checked yet. That's not good enough. You got to be on there. So, those are basics, and I know many of you are laughing, but so many people, even at senior level, come to meetings not being prepared. That's a no-go.
And check the people, because, of course, it's not just about the business, it's about the individuals who you're meeting. And to your question about social media and what's up there about individuals, of course, you can see all of this stuff about the kind of people who are going to be interviewing you as well. So it puts you on the front foot more so than perhaps you could have been in the past. I was also going to say to all of the gentlemen in the room that it's very important to wear a tie, but then, of course, I turned up without one. So I'd add to what Anders said, just in terms of the importance of being able to use the opportunities that you get in the conversation to to differentiate yourself, to sell yourself. I mean, an interview is fundamentally a selling opportunity, and it's your chance to really put yourself out there. And believe it or not, there are actually quite a lot of people who are in the role of hiring, and it's their job to bring people into the organization who are actually not very good at interviewing, and they don't give you the opportunity to sell yourself. So be very kind of wary of the questions that are being asked, and be very wary of utilizing the opportunities that you have to differentiate yourself and to highlight your language skills or to highlight your experience in an international country or something that will ensure that you are selling yourself and making sure that you're standing out from the crowd.
I mean, I think the worst interview I ever experienced, and I was interviewing, by the way, not being interviewed, just to be really clear, was a candidate who on paper looked amazing. So he was president of the Oxford Union, glowing CV, perfect track record through the A-levels, lots of work experience, lots of extracurricular activities. So you sort of get this CV and you're expected to be super impressed. And I kind of got into the interview room with him, and he obviously just thought the job was his before we even started the interview process, because I think he'd been one of those people who just had success all the way through their lives and then had just hit this and expected this was just going to be a continuation of that success. And to the points just made, he hadn't done enough preparation. So I was talking about the firm and what he found, why did he want to join the firm, no real good answers there. Started drilling into some of the technical stuff, and it was clear that that was just not where it should be, and he hadn't really done a thorough enough job of preparing. So we got about sort of 20 minutes in. I said, thank you very much, good to meet you, and goodbye. And then obviously the headhunter went back to him and said, unfortunately, it's not a green light, it's not a go. And he phoned me up and wanted to debate the point with me, which I guess, given he was a former president of the Oxford Union, made sense, right? Because that's a debating society. But he then wanted to debate with me why I hadn't given him the job. And I actually gave him the same feedback again as I gave him at the time. And I don't know if he went away and thought about it. I haven't seen him around the place. So he hasn't popped up at any other investment bank that I'm aware of. So I'd say that was probably the worst one. It is, regardless of how good you think you are, you need to prepare.
Thank you for sharing your advice with me. I'm now going to ask you guys to ask some questions. If you have any, please raise your hand. If someone can get a microphone on this side, I think we have a few questions.
Hi. First, I would just like to say thank you to everybody who came to talk to us today. I really appreciate it. I guess my question would be more directed to Nick Bishop. Do you have any specific advice for women wanting to go in the baking sector when it's predominantly a male industry?
I think that's a really good question. It is a male-dominated industry, sadly. And what's interesting is, for me, is I actually think, for example, I sit in the consumer retail group, and we're about 50-50 male-female. But if I look at the managing director cohort, I would say there's probably less than 10 of the MD cohort are women. And that's not for lack of trying. I mean, the firm, I know, and indeed my previous firm, have made immense efforts to try and encourage women and try and encourage them to kind of move up through the careers. The one thing I would say is, I think, again, just going back to the points I made earlier around the internal networking, I think internal networking with other women and learning kind of how they've progressed in their careers and getting to know some of the senior women in a business so that you figure out how they've made it. And that's probably, in terms of my advice to you, in terms of if you ever wanted to go investment banking, actually speaking to some senior women who are in the business, figuring out how they've kind of navigated their way through their careers, and also just getting a sense of what it is that they gave up, right? What were the other things they thought about doing? What were the other possibilities for them, and why they kind of stuck with it?
Thank you.
Yeah, also about investment banking, talking about summer internship, which is the main door to investment banking. Do you consider only penultimate year student in the bachelor's, also later in the academic career? And also, second question is, which are the university you most recruit from and candidates you find are at least most prepared, if you have any preferences?
So in answer to your first question, we do recruit for the summer intern program after the first degree, because we recognize there are some people who want to kind of get a master's and then kind of start their career. In answer to your second question, There is a very targeted effort at the London universities and Oxford and Cambridge, and then there is a less targeted effort at Bristol, Bath, York, and Warwick for Morgan Stanley, and that's just within the UK. And then, of course, there are different priorities in the rest of Europe. Now, it isn't to say that you can't apply if you haven't been to one of those universities, but I have to say, as I say, the HR screening process would tend to be slightly biased towards those schools.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Hello. Well, this is a question open to everybody. So, what are the most lacking traits in leaders nowadays?
The leadership traits.
Yeah.
The lacking traits. That's a very interesting question. I think ultimately one of the things that we don't see enough of is humility and the focus on people, funnily enough. If you flip the question around a little bit and think about what it is that makes some individuals particularly successful, is an extraordinary drive, an innate kind of burning passion to grow and to develop within an organization. And sometimes what happens is that the bit that can fall by the wayside, which is actually the most important bit, is the focus on people and the focus on who it is that you're bringing up through the organization, who it is you have around you to support you as you continue to obviously develop your career and grow with the business. So I think that, if there's a way of turning your question into a piece of advice is to basically say that it's always critical to not only think about your own agenda, but to think about the agenda of those around you as well, and how, as a budding leader, you can obviously demonstrate the skill sets that are required to help other people grow within an organization as well.
Question at the back.
Hi, how are you? I'm Jasmine from Chile, and I want to ask you if the visa issue is something that can influence the choice of recruit someone.
Well, as a company that hires lots of young people from all over the world, visa is a challenge. So if you don't have a visa, there's a rigorous process here in the UK, and it's a very costly process. So unless you really, really stand out, we probably would decide to go for someone that does have a visa, to be honest.
And for us, we recruit globally. There are some European Union regulations around getting visas for certain types of jobs, and we're not excluded from that. Certainly when I've come across people that do have visa issues, if the person is good, we will try and find a place for them somewhere in the business. We're a global business. So if we find someone who, unfortunately, for whatever reason, finds it difficult to get a UK visa, we may look at New York as a potential option, or Hong Kong as a potential option, if we think we can get that person into the business, if they're a good person. I think because we're such a global business, we are focused on finding the very best talent. And yes, I'd love them to come and work for me in London, but if that's not possible, I have been involved in situations where we've had to put people in New York or Hong Kong.
Hello, over here. I have a general question. What was your inspiration to get into the business that you got into?
So I guess I got into my industry a little bit by chance. I always had a passion for fashion, but what I always enjoyed was leadership. So I always had a burning desire to lead people, develop people, and what I take the most pride in today is to develop young people into more senior positions. So I guess what always drove me and gave me that burning desire is to see people grow, see businesses grow. And I actually never cared too much whether I was selling office products, or I was working in China or in Germany, or working for a fashion business in the UK. That's not what drove me, but what drove me was developing people and developing businesses.
I'm probably one of the few examples of people that you will talk to in the executive search industry or the recruitment space who actually wanted to get into it. And part of the reason was that I saw what it was that search firms do. And the difference between perhaps a recruitment firm and a search firm is the level of the individual that you're working with and the level of client that you're working with. And one of the things that particularly inspired me was the idea of being able to help businesses on very important issues relating to how it was that they were bringing the best people on board. And it is remarkable when you take a step back. Sometimes we get so entrenched in our day jobs and we're just there working through whatever it is that we're working on that we sometimes forget to step back. But what is quite, for me, rewarding and inspiring about the industry is that the people that we put into the businesses will go on to have a fundamental effect on that business in terms of value creation if it's in a private equity business, in terms of potentially share price if it's in a public business. So a real opportunity to affect a senior level agenda, a board level agenda within businesses was what brought me into the industry. Doesn't mean to say it doesn't frustrate me massively, which it obviously does regularly, but it is certainly that opportunity to affect change at the top table that drew me into it.
In terms of what attracted me to investment banking, I had a fairly random walk into investment banking. It was totally by accident and not by design. So having said all these things about being prepared and getting work experience and focusing on academics and all of those good things, you may read in the little bios that you have in front of you. So my degree was in biochemistry. I thought I was going to do a PhD in biochemistry and probably discover something interesting about cancer. I actually got to in my third year and actually worked in a lab for 6 weeks, and that killed my interest in the whole subject altogether. Lab work did not appeal to me at all. If you Google my name, Nicholas Bishop, and DNA, you will find a research paper which I have some credit from. So there's a very arcane similarity between gorilla and human reproductive DNA. There is a research paper. Now, I say that because the rest of the lab were hugely excited about this discovery, and I was left completely cold. And there was the realization then that if it left me completely cold, the thought of doing another 3 years plus another 3 years in the lab before I was allowed sort of near the teaching of students and all the rest of it, it really sort of put me off. So then I thought, well, that was plan A. That's not plan A anymore. I better take some time off. So I did some traveling, came back, discovered a couple of schoolmates of mine had got into accountancy. And I asked them, why did you go into that? They said, well, we don't know what to do either. Okay. So I'll train to be an accountant, because at least I've had some professional training, and that might be good in any case. And I had a very supportive partner at KPMG, who I owe a lot to, who allowed me just to work through the entire business. So I worked in audit, tax, M&A, transaction services, restructuring, management consulting, all the businesses that KPMG then owned. I was allowed to do a tour around all of them, and actually found that the most interesting was the one that was more transaction related. And again, I had a very supportive boss in that job, and he said, oh, here's a very interesting job in investment banking. And I said, that does look interesting. So I applied for it, and then got it, and then that started my career. And my move into covering leisure and retail was equally random. I applied to UBS through a headhunter who told me there's a great job going at UBS in real estate. So I turned up for the interview, having learnt all there was to know, I thought, about British land and land securities and all these listed real estate companies, to discover Jason Katz sitting there with another colleague who ran the leisure group at UBS, and it wasn't anything to do with real estate at all. So thank you to the headhunter, not the gentleman to my right. It was someone of a much lesser caliber. I sort of stumbled through the interview, again, having said all these things about being prepared, got the job, and that was the start of my career in leisure, and then onwards into retail. So that random walk is unusual. I think that happened at a certain period of time in the market. I think you have to be a lot more prepared. But I guess, moved my way into investment banking because I felt it was going to be something that would suit me, that I would wake up every morning to a different set of challenges, and that has broadly turned out to be the case. I think one of the attractions I have about investment banking is you work on so many different things, you work with so many different people, and it's a different thing every day.
What would you advise to our graduates for the first 10 years of their career life? I mean, looking back on their own experience.
I think the question was, what do you advise to our future graduates for the first 10 years of their career?
Good. So what I would advise is make sure you get a diverse background, that you try different things, preferably different markets so you understand different cultures, because if you do go out there and try different things, you have a broader background, you can go into investment banking, you can do this, you can go into retailing, rather than just focus on one specific thing. My recommendation has always been in the past to young people, you're not quite sure what you want to do, is to either go into consultancy, because that offers a lot of variety, different opportunities to work in retail, financial services, or go into retailing, because in retailing you can do marketing, you can do everything that's got to do with sales and stores, you can do finance, you can do HR. There's a whole raft of different opportunities within retailing. So if anybody's interested, I'm eager to get some resumes.
I think it's a really good question, because one of the things that you recognize as you see people who have progressed through careers is that actually careers can go on to be very long. And I think the only thing I would say to that is don't rush. Don't necessarily feel that you have to achieve everything within the first 10 years of your career. Sometimes a lateral move can actually serve you far better further down the line than necessarily thinking about that next promotion and the next promotion and the next promotion. So recognizing that careers are long and recognizing that the first 10 years are actually a brilliant opportunity to take a bit of time and make sure you know what it is that you want to do and where you want to go on and grow into a more senior level further down the line.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think the first 10 years are about finding out what you are, what you want to be, getting as much different experiences as you can. I think what's interesting about the people coming into our business today is how focused they are on the end point. So we have these analysts that come into this business and they would say, I'm really concerned about how I make MD. It's like, well, you've only been in this business 5 minutes. Why don't you try and figure out whether investment banking is a good idea for you or not? And then maybe in 10 years' time, we'll have that discussion. But I think worrying about the end point, I think, is a distraction. I think it's the journey there. Yes, you need to make sure you've got the foundation stones in place. But sort of arriving at somewhere like Morgan Stanley and thinking about, I want to be an MD in 12 years' time, 13 years' time, is, I think, the wrong way to look at it. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever received in my career was, do not focus on the current organogram, it is always changing. And that was given to me when I was a VP, so kind of 7 years in, and I was fretting about my position in the firm and whether there was going to be room for me. And I was told, look, if you're good, we will find a place for you, right? Because actually, firms like ours are pretty efficient about talent. Without talent, we don't have a business. We are a people business. And I think we're pretty good at identifying good, strong people and then finding homes for them. So my advice is get as much experience as you can and don't worry too much about the 10, 15-year view. It'll sort itself out.
Hi. Does it work? Yeah. Thank you very much for the talk. Great. I was wondering, just a recommendation. So you talk about discovering what you want first 10 years of your career. As a graduate, you don't always know what you exactly want. And what kind of recommendation would you give to people who go to job interviews or search for, or are interested in certain industries, but are not certain yet what they want? What kind of positioning do you take as a candidate? And is that something that you see, that you can look through? I'm just wondering what you would recommend.
Go ahead.
Well, I'd say work experience in terms of taking advantage of any opportunities that you can do to gain that practical experience. That's going to be very important. But not that I'm seeking to completely counter the point that Nick just made, but I think it, in some respects, not necessarily being focused on the future, I think, is a good thing, but understanding what it is that the senior leaders within the kind of businesses that you're looking to go into do. So having an understanding of the various different functions within a business, having an understanding of which route you want to take up in it as well. I mean, I focus on consumer and retail as well. And it's amazing sometimes when I'm talking to family friends and to individuals who are coming through, even family members who are looking to get into, getting on the career ladder, that people don't understand what it is that individuals do within businesses. They understand the business and they have a sense of what it is that New Look does, or they have an understanding of what it is that Unilever does, but it's about the components of those businesses that some people seem to lack a real understanding of. So getting that practical experience, absolutely, talking to people to make sure that you can actually get under the skin of what the individual functions do, and making sure that you research and using the opportunities and all of the tools that we have at our resource to be able to understand what it is that everyone does in those businesses as well. But actually doing it and touching it and feeling it is the best way you can get that experience.
And you're already doing this. You're sitting here, you've been listening to a number of speakers, you should do a lot more of that, because how can you know? You're probably 20 years old or 21 years old. I mean, it's impossible to know what your career is going to look like. I think all of us had a different idea of what our careers were going to look like. And that's okay. You cannot know, but it's trying different things. It's going to seminars. It's meeting people. It's networking. It's linking up with people on LinkedIn, doing all of that. And, you might not get the first job right or the second job right, but eventually you will get that right. But that's all a part of the journey. And I wouldn't be too worried about it, because I guess most people in here, don't really know.
Yep, I agree with all of that. Yep.
Thank you. Our final question for tonight. Whoever gets the microphone first.
First of all, thank you for taking time today to come and talk to us.
Sure.
Okay, my first question is, I don't know if I have to say it's a silly one, because we all nowadays kind of stuck in this loop where we need to have work experience in order to get a job. And in order to get experience, you need to get a job, you need to experience, basically. I would like to know, what do you think about that, and what are the advices would you tell a young graduates person today in order to overcome that kind of dilemma? And second question is, you talked about being authentic in everything you do, be true to yourself. Considering that most companies nowadays focus on the academic part of it, the paper, how would you actually identify the authenticity of a person based on a resume? Because that's the first thing you assess when you look at somebody. Says you look at a piece of paper and you be like, okay, this is a young man applying for this job. He's got the great qualification, but how can you tell if that person is genuine and authentic, as you talked earlier?
Sure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a great question. I mean, part of the work that we do, which actually helps a lot in getting through that, is, and this isn't necessarily applicable to everyone in this room, but it's obviously making sure that we dig deep into reputations of individuals, and then we can obviously get beyond what we see on paper. I guess when you start out, when you're beginning your career, that is always going to be the challenge. And I think you can demonstrate authenticity by trying to bring to life a little bit about who you are. So it's not just about saying that you went to such and such a university and received such and such a degree. What are your interests? Or what have you done? What are the wow factors? Did you climb Mount Everest? Or have you done something a little bit different? It's stuff like that that really leaps out. I received a really interesting CV recently of a senior executive who put down in his interests, and people still do put interests at the bottom, that one of his main interests was Aberdeen Angus cattle. And I just had to meet the guy. I just thought, this is intriguing. So there are things that you can do, I think, that can at least make you stand out on paper, because that's your brand. That's the beginning of your brand. Every brand has various different strands to it, and the first piece of your brand is obviously making sure that you have the right content on your CV or indeed on your LinkedIn page.
I'm always telling my kids that you are a brand as an individual. You're a brand, and what is that you want to stand for? Do you do charity work? Have you worked at McDonald's? Have you worked at 7-Eleven? It all counts, and I think you need to bring that alive in your CV, and you'll get to the next step. There's absolutely no doubt. But it's bringing it to life within a resume.
Yeah, and look, I mean, when I see a CV and I look at someone who's done nothing but working in financial services internships for 3 years running, I'm slightly concerned about the individual, frankly, and worry slightly whether they are going to be sort of personable when I meet them in person. So I think the point that Anders makes is absolutely right. Not everyone will be able to get an internship at Morgan Stanley. Not everyone will be able to get an internship at Google or wherever. But actually, the get up and go required to get a job, to be successful in it, no matter what it is, and then bring that to life in the interview process, it's as much that, right? If I have a candidate in front of me who's done 2 internships, one at Morgan Stanley, one at Goldman Sachs, but isn't able to talk about kind of what they did and why they found it interesting and why they want to continue doing that, then they're just not going to get hired.
Thank you. That's it from Q&As tonight. To close off the night, I'd like to welcome back our fantastic president, Sophie Kristiansen.
It helps to turn on the mic sometimes. Anyway, I would just like to say a huge thank you to you guys for coming out today and sharing your wonderful insight and expertise. Second of all, I think we've all learned today that it's all about preparation, making yourself unique. Find out what you love to do and what you're good at, and truly sell that in various ways, social media, CVs. So yes, I think we're all leaving this room today with a new sense of motivation to just go out there, be our best that we can absolutely be. Just before we finish off, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the business conference team. You've probably seen them around. Some of them are here on the side. They're all wearing the red little tag. They have been a huge part of putting this event together. Without them, this would not have taken place. Yeah, it's for all of you. Thank you. So just to finish off, thank you all for coming. Again, round of applause for the speakers, and I hope you've had a nice day.